Good evening and Happy New Year, everyone. I'm David Eglin, President of the Society for Contemporary Art at the Art Institute of Chicago. We are excited to welcome you tonight for a program with multidisciplinary artist Ken Lum, with a special thank you to Prada for providing support for this virtual event. Before I introduce Programming Chair Patty Sternberg, I'd like to highlight some of our upcoming SCA programs and events. On February 9th, artist Cameron Rowland will be joined in conversation by curator Richard Burkett. Rowland creates work that centers on material operations of racial capitalism that order everyday life. In 2017, the SCA was pleased to acquire a work by Rowland for the Art Institute's permanent collection. We're grateful to the School of the Art Institute's Visiting Artist Program for presenting this program with us. China-born and Netherlands-based artist Evelyn T. Wang will give an in-person performance at the museum on April 6th. We're looking forward to being able to host Evelyn here in Chicago and at the Art Institute. This program is made possible with support of Prada. Also in April, the SCA will offer a members-only exhibition viewing of Ikshan Adams' Desire Lines on April 14th. This evening offers a unique opportunity to privately experience the exhibition with fellow SCA members and hear an introduction to the exhibition by Hendrik Volkerts, curator of international contemporary art at Modena Museet. A member reception is generously sponsored by Christie's. And on April 23rd, the SCA sponsored Iterations Performance Series will return with Paulina Aloska, Naughty Nymphs in the Courtyard of Favorites. Also, SCA members, please save May 5th in your calendars for our 2022 annual meeting, which will be in person this year. More details will be shared soon. For more information on upcoming programs, please visit the SCA website at scaic.org. Now, I'd like to invite our programming chair, Patty Sternberg, to give an introduction to tonight's presentation by Ken Lum. Thank you. Patty?
Thank you, David. We are honored to have Ken Lum opening the SCA's public programming for 2022. Ken Lum's work explores how existing political, economic, and social structures play a significant role in the construction of identity, which leads to tensions between personal experience and external classification. He is interested in the systems that order our perception of the everyday world, using modes of advertising to address personal anxieties in the public sphere. His depictions are not idealized, but record the everyday person striving for autonomy in a society that shapes their positions. Born and raised in Vancouver, Canada, Ken has participated in numerous exhibitions such as Documenta, the Venice Biennale, Sao Paulo Biennale, Istanbul Biennale, Shanghai Biennale, and the Whitney Biennial. A longtime professor, he currently is Marilyn J. Taylor Penn Presidential Professor and Chair of Fine Arts at the University of Pennsylvania's Weissman School of Design in Philadelphia. Ken is also co-founder and founding editor of Yishu Journal of Contemporary Chinese Art. Ken is a prolific writer, and a book of his writings titled Everything is Relevant, Writings on Art and Life, 1991 to 2018, was published in 2020 by Concordia University Press. More recently, he completed 2 feature-length movie screenplays dealing with Chinese contract laborers in the immediate post-Civil War era, the first set in 1868 and the second in 1885. Since the mid-1990s, Ken has worked on numerous major permanent public art commissions, including for the cities of Vienna, Rotterdam, St. Louis, Leiden, Utrecht, Toronto, and Vancouver. He has a curatorial record co-curating Shanghai Modern, 1919 to 1945, Sharjah Biennial 7, Sharjah United Arab Emirates, and the Monument Lab, Creative Speculations for Philadelphia. Ken is the co-founder and chief curatorial advisor to Monument Lab, a public art and history collective founded in Philadelphia. Now, please join me in warmly welcoming Ken Lum. And remember, submit your questions via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Ken will take a few audience questions at the end of his presentations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patty. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. And also to David and both Patty inviting me to this event. I wish I was in Chicago. It'd be nice to get out of the house for a change and so on, but for health reasons, obviously I can't. I have a lot of images to go through, but you know, I will try to keep to about 55 minutes and run through it. I just wanted to amend a little bit of Patty's introduction, that I'm not a Canadian artist so much anymore. Yesterday I was naturalized, so I guess I'm an American now. So I was waving the flag outside the immigration center and so on. So anyways, and happy to be so. When I started in art, it was really at the end point of conceptual art, the end of the 1970s. I graduated, I think those who are familiar with my biography know that I have a science degree. I was studying pestology, which is basically insecticide research and so on. And that was an area I was going to go into for graduate studies. But throughout my high school years, and ever since I was a little kid, I always liked to draw. But in my high school year, I lived very near a neighbor who taught me how to be his sign painting assistant. So I helped paint like not giant, but they were fairly big placards advertising for Jean's Grill, which was a diner nearby, or Eldridge Drugs, and also Monarch Furniture and places like that. And I would, you know, use the old pin and chalk system, which nobody uses anymore, to make you know, 10 by 12 feet signs, and or you know, with the daily special, which I always enjoyed doing, Salisbury steak with piping hot mashed potatoes and peas and so on. So I learned how to do that kind of thing. And my neighbor, who was a sign painter, it was actually English, and he graduated from the Royal Academy in London and became a stevedore when he moved to Canada. I never really became a contemporary artist, and he taught me how to clay model figures. And so I kind of made a side income modeling clay, and then people would make bronze busts out of them, and I'd also draw figures and you know, draw cartoons of people in restaurants, and made money in that way. So that's just a funny way of saying that I think I was always interested in art, but I didn't know anything about the contemporary art world. Didn't know contemporary art even existed. It was just not a world that was open to me or exposed to me as someone who comes from a single mother sweatshop, first generation background. And so, you know, I thought art was just about drawing, or what do you call it? You're an illustrator or a graphic designer, and that was the extent of it. And then when I discovered art, only taking 2 courses in undergraduate, I was just totally smitten by it. And I started going into, the first image, please. I started going into performance. Oh, maybe I should, so I've got my own speaker view. That's why it's confusing me. Right. And so I started just testing things that was totally unfamiliar to me as art. And so this is like a performance, which I did as an undergraduate, where I walked back and forth between that door and that rod on the floor, on the ground. And I walked 9 hours back and forth, no washroom break. And I was doing these kinds of performances just to really embody from experientially all the things I was learning about contemporary art, performance art, you know, minimal art, male art, there's feminist art, there's all kinds of new categories of art that was really opening up at that point. And I felt very lucky to be introduced to that period, including you know, going to the Vancouver Art Gallery, and there'd be Michael Asher or Martha Rothler, James Collins and Ian Wilson, and people like that, Joseph Gosuth. And anyways, so next image. Yeah, and I did a whole series of performances. I guess I was I liked performance because it just seemed like it was not art to me. When I grew up, it was like the furthest thing I can imagine art to be. Art was about drawing a horse realistically, and I knew I could do that. And yet I would meet these colleagues who were really interested in art, and they couldn't connect two dots together with a pencil. And I went, how could you go into art if you can't even do that? And so but then at some point I realized that art was much more than connecting two dots. It was thinking about the world askance, thinking about it from a different perspective. So I won't go into this performance, but it was over a number of days where I was just watching morning traffic from this spot on the embankment of a freeway, and cops were called and so on. Okay, next. And so I was really testing myself. I was fascinated by Minimal. I remember thinking, wow, this Minimal, I mean, there's no hand of the artist, and for me that was really radical at the time. And because I grew up in a very conservative idea of what art could be. And so I made this work, right? I rented some furniture. I saw an ad come in a mailer into my home, and I went, wow, okay, what if? And it was about sectional furnitures, and I thought, well, what if you close that section? Then you've got a minimal art piece. Okay, next. And then it became more elaborate, such as this, and then I started really learning about my work, right? Because I realized the conversation was put in quotation, the conversational space was put into quotation, and the real space of conversation was actually outside the quoted conversational space, and those types of things. And I was also interested in how minimal art repress or suppress the kind of social aspects of its signifiers, and obviously also the kind of transition alignment, you might say, between private space of the home, be it the collector or the exhibitor or the artist, and the gallery space and so on. So the private space is a kind of domestic space that's often idealized in advertising, and the privacy of it is, to me, there's a parallel with that, with the privacy of the white cubistic ideal, the gallery space, and so on. But I do want to say one anecdote related to this piece, Sculpture for Dream Home. I gave a talk in my work probably about 8 or 9 years ago now. And what happened was a very well-known curator, who will go unnamed, I told this story about how I picked this furniture because that was my economy at the time. It was the most I can afford to do, but I also picked it because I said that my mother would have really liked this furniture. And during dinner afterwards, the curator was looking at me, and then I looked at him and he said, "I don't believe you." And I said, "What do you mean you don't believe me?" He said, "I don't believe you when you say that you picked this furniture because your mother would have liked it." And I said, "Well, why would that be so hard to believe?" He says, "Because it's clearly ugly." So it tells you that the art world itself has all kinds of issues in terms of not being able to imagine the subject position of someone lesser, so to speak. Okay, next. Here's another piece, an homage to Smithson's Partially Buried Sofa. Right, I was just I didn't have any galleries. It was basically a studio space I would rent, right? And then I would rent the furniture, and then I always worked in all kinds of part-time jobs just to make these works, because it's probably like 120 cushions, which I could ill afford, and so it took me like a year just to look for cushion sales and get a diversity of cushions and so on. Okay, next. And I work in several different channels. I was very interested, and I think, as I said earlier, and conceptual art allowed for me to do this. Also, I should also add that it allowed for a working class Asian Canadian to do this as well at that time, because it was no longer at least there was a heeding of diversity, let's say, if not in practice, but in theory and in discourse at that time. So I'd make these kinds of works, and this is like called Untitled Zainab. The orange part is actually out of plexiglass. It's about 9 feet across by 4.5 feet high, and it's notched out. The white would be the wall, and it hangs, it's about 2 inches deep, and the orange surface extends underneath the photographic part. I hired a studio photographer to take pictures of just friends of mine. Not because I couldn't take the picture, but because I was really interested in systems of representation, and I was interested in how, the codification in terms of logo types, and paralleling that with the systems of representation, embodied by the studio commercial photographer, for example. Okay, next. So this is Untitled Ed. Again, this is a studio photography with a fake library background. Okay, next. I was interested in these kind of systems, you might say. And at some point, and this is Untitled Keith. And at some point I realized that, and this is the channel, WNBC Channel 4 logo for New York City. And I was kind of interested in how, the more dynamic part was actually the abstract part, not the photographic part. The photographic part was too subsumed within a kind of system. It was too tamped down and dehumanized even. And so I wanted to give greater equilibrium between the two sides. The next. I continued developing the furniture works. This is from 1985. My arms are ready to embrace the universe with love. I have to say most people at that time really didn't like this work, although now it seems like every time I have a show, you want to do a furniture work? So that's something about the art world, I guess. Okay, next. Yeah, line. So, following on minimal art again, upright couches, but it's also like an assembly line, construction line of furniture and so on. Good, next. Red circle. Next. It's just a different type of domesticity in terms of class. Okay, next. Next. And I would have a very specially designed fabric on this. This image doesn't convey it, but the corner is, you see a lot of red, and you enter the gallery from the far right side, and you can't see the bed is pulled out until you get to it. What you do see is a kind of red glow against the white wall. Okay, next. Next. Okay, next. And I was, as I mentioned earlier, I was a sign painter, and so I started doing these sorts of works as well, these kind of language paintings, and I saw them as a way, much like Apollinaire and the Lettrist movement in Paris, wanted to dissect and break down the page, right? Literature, the rules of literature. I wanted to break down the sign, the commercial sign, and so on. Okay, next. So these were all painted by me on a kind of plywood, special type of plywood, usually marine plywood, and then they would be grommeted directly to the wall. Okay, next. And these would be just two pieces. And you may have seen also KL on the other one. So I often would sign my initial into some part of the painting. Okay, next. Okay, next. Oh yeah, and I always made a drawing of the language painting. In fact, I make a drawing of pretty well every work I make. And then next, then I paint it. This is from a slide, that's why it doesn't look so sharp. Okay. Next. I guess I was interested with the language paintings. I was interested in the kind of pictorialism of text, much as I was interested in the textuality of images. And so to illustrate that, here, these ones I started taking pictures. So I took a picture of Jillian and Smokey, and and I wanted to show that she's growing, right? And Smokey's the pet, and so I hope animals lovers don't hate me for this, but the pet doesn't grow, at least in my term, mentally and so on, the same way the human being does. And so I wanted to kind of show that with this kind of odd caption. Next. And I started thinking about logo types for personalized logo type for friends of mine. This is Amrita Sandhi, who was a friend of mine. This is her mother, Mrs. Sandhi. And then I would design a logo for these friends of mine. And Mr. Sandhi is represented by his last name, the patriarch, the name of the father, and so on. So it is a complete family here. Next, Steve. Next, Jansen family. And I know there's a Jansen swimwear company, but it's not. This is for the Jansen family here. Okay, next. Owner family. And again, you know, her last name, she's Chinese and her last name is Wong. And so owner is obviously the father's name. And I like these kinds of, you know, these, you know, mixed race families, which is a kind of recurring theme along with death and other things in my work. Okay, next. CISO and EFSO growth. Next. Little Krista and Mr. Policeman. These are from slides, and that's why it didn't look very sharp, but the works themselves are very shiny and done with a large format camera, a 4x5 camera. So it was very detailed. Okay, next. This was actually bought by Martin Kippenberger, the late German artist, who's a friend of mine. And it hangs in the Paris bar in Berlin. Next. And just a quick anecdote. I mean, I got this work. So how do I make these works? I met a German friend of mine. I hadn't seen him in a while. I knew his parents quite well. And, you know, English was a second language for him. And so I said, Daniel, how are you doing? And he said, I'm fine, in a strong German accent. I said, how's your mother and father? And he said, oh, my mother and father, I love my mother and father, right? So, and I think it was this, and I remember thinking, yeah, that deserves a piece, because, and the way I was thinking was that he was very open about it, because it may be in part because English was a second language. And so he kind of spouted that out. Or maybe that's really how I see a kind of problem in on this side of the ocean, where even if you felt like that, you would never say it to someone else openly like that. So I thought, what if you had a young, handsome kid who, you know, boy, teenager, you know, basically stating, I love my mother and father, you know, stating his affection for them. Okay, next. Again, I like this kind of, and Tracy Bond meets Pepe Pig is complete mise en scène. I designed the pig outfit. There's no such thing as Pepe's Pizza. And it was quite elaborate to do, a large format camera again. They got much bigger, done on powder coated aluminum. You know, it's about 12.5 feet across, this work. So very, very large. And, you know, I have a kind of anecdote about this one as well. I was sitting in front of some coffee bar, and the A&W Root Bear came strolling down and was handing out free, you know, root beer or French fry coupons and hamburger coupons. And suddenly, as I was having my coffee, a little girl who looked like Goldilocks kind of came out and kind of gave the A&W Root Beer a big hug and said, I love you, A&W Root Beer. All right, Root Bear. Right. And I went, oh my God, there's something odd about it. There was something perverse about this kind of appropriation of this girl's, a little girl's enchantment for basically a mascot of a major hamburger chain, and so on. So that's how, you know, I get ideas like that in real life, and And that's how it resulted in this work, Tracy Bond meets Pepe Pig. Okay, next. I was interested in identity, multiple identities, and Pamela Cloggins is a stripper and she's Candy Sweet, but is she Candy Sweet or is she Pamela Cloggins? And I risked my life to nab her. I actually went into a strip bar with a whole bunch of images of my work, you know, and some huge guy just tossed me out onto the street, thinking I was bothering her. Anyway, okay, next. Next. So I went by the studio photographer whom I hired for the first series, and I thought, hey, could I? And I found out he was retiring, so I said, you know, I'd love to do a piece about you, where I can take your picture, right? And I would set you up according to, you know, what I knew about studio photography. And there he is holding onto his Hasselblad. Okay, next. Again, this work hangs in the Museum Boymans and Bunningen in Rotterdam. It's a work about Canada, and I think you know, a nation or you know, is constituted by the symbol at its best, you might say, or most powerful, and the symbol at its most oppressed. And so I wanted to do a piece about that. Okay, next. I met Werner Beckman in Vancouver by chance, and I said, man, you really look like this Berlin artist. And he said, yeah, he was my great uncle. And so I went, okay, I need to make a piece about this. Okay, next. Next. Oops, double image, next. And I did this probably around 95, and these are called photo mirrors. I didn't want to take, I wanted basically a hiatus from taking pictures, but I was still very interested in, you know, the operations of the camera. And so, and I was interested in the camera, the photograph, the souvenir, souvenir in the French sense of memory. And so, you know, I would collect up all these pictures and they would be pinned to the edges, sort of like a Jules Zalitsky abstract painting. The edges were always kind of important, and they would be pinned in a way that you couldn't extract them. And the sources were multiple. They weren't just from one person, but it didn't really matter. And they would be thoughtfully lined up to the edge and in a very rectilinear way. And as I mentioned, the sources were varied, but it didn't matter because as soon as you put pictures on the same frame, you read it as a single narrative. You read it as a single source, as a single identity, for example, and so on. So I did this next. And this is in Andrea Rosengari in New York. And you know, I love the idea. You came in and you could see people looking. You could see yourself looking. You could see yourself looking at other people looking. And it was a kind of infinity chamber, you might say. Okay, next. And I continued to do these kind of image text works. I just showed a bunch of furniture works earlier together, but they would, you know, in real time, they would be punctuating these works. Okay. This was done in homage to Vancouver, I guess, and early 1990s. And, you know, and of course, if you know anything about Vancouver, it's all about real estate at this point. Okay, next. Again, very big works, almost 10 feet across in powder-coated aluminum. Next. This was actually on MTV once, and the lead singer for Steve, I can't remember his name, Aerosmith, Steve Tyler. He actually, there was a show at a gallery in Soho at that time in New York and on rock and roll. And I'm watching this in Vancouver on TV, and Steve Tyler goes right in front of it, and he turns around, and he goes, like stick out his tongue, and he goes like that with his fingers. And I remember thinking, wow, high point of my career. Okay, next. Bindi Sanjit, Employee of the Month. Okay, next. Oh, what happened? Okay, sorry about that. Next. Felicia McGuire moves again. One thing I always try to do is I try to show the full figure, right, all the time. So it's not in later works, kind of middle distance to give it a sense of objectivity and so on. Okay, next. A woodcutter and his wife. This is a work, it's very large. And this is a work it's about the lumber industry. I come from Western Canada where lumber is important. And I wanted to do a piece about resource extraction, and it's premised on a painting by Lucas Cranach, both younger or the elder, it didn't matter since they both did Adam and Eve paintings. So it's really about Adam and Eve, and they're both holding on to instruments that that can take down the forest, right, such as a cigarette or a chainsaw. And the woodcutter and his wife comes from the first line of the Grimm brothers collected story of Hansel and Gretel, and the woodcutter's wife refers to the Hansel and Gretel's parents. And he said he holds on to a little axe and the father and goes out and get a bit of kindling for the fire to make food, not chopping down several hundred acres in a day like we can do today to have old growth forest. Okay, next. These are too complicated to talk about. I'm not going to talk about these. Okay, next. And I continue to develop that one with image text. And I was interested. I was reading this book by this great kind of an amateur art historian, Eunice Lipton, and about duration in 17th and 18th century French still life paintings and landscape paintings. And so I was kind of influenced by this idea of enhancing duration in the picture, and duration meaning duration of viewing. And so I started thinking about, well, what if I made the text mantric-like? They would be variations of the same text. There would be a kind of circularity in terms of the viewer reading the text, and you would also know, you could see almost subliminally that there's only so many words. You could see daddy 4 times, and what is it 3 times, what 4 times, and so on. So there's not a lot of amendments to the change of one line to the next. And I thought that was a way of creating a kind of circularity that fed your eye or attention back to the photographic part and to enhance its duration. Okay, next. Next. Don't be silly. You're not ugly. You're not ugly. You're not ugly at all. You're being silly. You're just being silly. You're not ugly at all. And again, the surface is very shiny and very even in terms of the color, but the image somehow has this gray on the far right, which is not there normally. Okay, next. I was having fun doing this one because it's really about staging. And so the director is telling this nude man how to act, and you can see the chalk marks on the ground. You can also see chalk marks in front of his shoes, the director's shoes. And so I'm actually staging the whole thing, telling the director this to act out, or the man unclothed to act out pain. Next. 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 I like myself the way I am. There's no reason to change. I like myself the way I am. There's no reason to change. The shutter speed on this was almost a minute, and she just kind of held it. Okay, next. I really wanted to deal with a lot of topics which aren't, I don't think, are done or dealt with very explicitly in contemporary art, at least at that time. Next. Next. Okay, next one. I did this for the Istanbul Biennale. I've done a number of pavilions and so on, but I can't really include them here, but I will talk about this one. It's, you know, as many of you know, Istanbul is at the intersection between Asia and Europe. And so the Bosphorus. And so I came up with this installation where it's about 50 feet long. You walk down, and on the opposite wall, you can see the text here in Turkish on top and then in English below. And the text is actually painted on the right side, which you don't see on a parallel wall, backwards. So it runs backwards. And so the only way you can actually read the text properly is to traverse the entire corridor all the way to the end to read the text. And the text that is actually on the wall is, it's from the 13th century. We entered the house of realization. We witnessed the body, the whirling skies, the many-layered earth, the 70,000 veils we found in the body, the night and the day, the planets, the words inscribed on the holy tablets, the hill that Moses climbed, the temple, and Israfil's trumpet we observed in the body. Torah, Psalm, Gospel, Quran, what these books have to say we found in the body. Everybody says these words of Eunice are true. Truth is wherever you want it. We found it all within the body. And when I came across this text, I loved, first of all, it's a Sufi poem, but it was very open in terms of the religions. And, you know, it's a very troubled part of the world. And so I wanted to make, and it was also about embodiment. So I wanted to make a piece about that. And so when the people walk down to the end, they have to turn the sharp left, and then they go down the second corridor, which you don't see here. And then you have to turn left again and go down a parallel corridor to this corridor. And then at the end of the third corridor, which is parallel to this corridor, next. All right, so this is, people are kind of looking at it and so on. Okay, next. They discover it's actually two-way glass, right? And it works so beautifully with the lights. No one suspected that when you see the person standing here, if you can see my cursor, he will go in a big U, and at the end of that U, he goes into this antechamber, darkened chamber, and you can observe people looking and trying to read the text. Next. And here's the case in point, right? And you know, it also got amusing because people would pick their nose. If there weren't too many people there, people would be putting on their lipstick, and there would only be several inches away from you, totally unaware that you were being looked upon. And it's not really about empowerment and disempowerment, because everyone ends up in the same spot, right? So, okay, next. And then I did these maybe about 8 years ago, I guess now. These are, and I was interested in the imagining a life, right? And I'm interested in plausibility. I'm not interested in, does Shirley Janet's truly exist, and so on, but she could exist. And so this is Shirley's Bakery, and the kind of simplified design, oven fresh daily. And then you have this kind of, you know, this kind of more provisional lettering, which you can slot in and say, and it reveals something of the sentiments of the workers or the owner, and so on, which can come into tension with the upper part, because the upper part is just matter of fact. It's a statement of purpose in terms of the business. Okay, next. Next. These would be about 7 by 7 feet, maybe a bit bigger sometimes. Next. 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 It's weird to do a talk on Zoom because there's no reaction. It's just silence. I might as well be on Mars. Okay, next. And there's no such thing as Mempo Falls, but there could be. That's what I'm more interested in. Okay, next. And again, if you imagine who Danny is, a person of a certain age, and he was maybe a radical, and he sympathized with the American Indian movement and Leonard Peltier, who's still in jail, by the way. Next. Ichabdinazabo. So it's like, it's an expression, like in French, you could say Jean le Rad la Bol. And in German, you would say Ich hab die Nase voll. I've had it up to here. Like my nose is all full. I've had it. Okay, next. 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 This is hanging in a hipster hotel. Okay, next. And then more recently, I guess about 4 years ago now, I did this series, necrology works. And they took a long time to do, actually, because I had to get the words right. It came about because I was reading on the front page of the Philadelphia Inquirer newspaper. It was the sesquicentennial of the death of Abraham Lincoln, and they reprinted the front page of Abraham Lincoln on the in the front page of the Inquirer, and I thought, wow. And of course, the language was very different, and the kerning was different, the spacing was different, and I was thinking about how, and it starts off, it starts off born in a log cabin. It had these chapter headings, and then the last one was a nation mourns, and I thought there was something I felt that was sad about this loss of imagining, right? That language is. There's something about the kind of rules that by today's standards would be unacceptable, right? And I thought, well, why? So I was kind of interested in bringing back something of these kind of frontispiece. They were called frontispiece languages that you see and to promote theater billets and things like that. And I wanted, again, I was very interested in imagining the being, the life of a particular person. And so I'll have to read these to you. The mystery of and these are about 9 feet high, actually, or 8 feet high, I guess. The Mystery of the Tattooed Lady, the most complete account of the mysterious death of Jade Vischer, the mother of an elementary school child, ever presented to the public reader with facts derived from the most authentic sources, including the coroner's toxicology tests, which have proved inconclusive as to cause of death, and investigators who have tried to trace her whereabouts before she died and whether someone drove Jade to the site where her body was found in the late evening or Saturday or early morning of Sunday, because there is no evidence that she walked there herself, and who remained unidentified until several photos of her distinctive tattoos and a wedding band were released, which helped investigators identify her as married to a woman from Lancaster last May, according to her Facebook page. So that's the Mystery of the Tattooed Lady. Okay, next. And another one, a recounting of the events and experiences in the life of Yashir Khurshid, with the means by which he acquired his courage and wisdom, whose influence in the field of garment factory reform was felt here and abroad, the iniquity of sweatshop conditions, a chronicle of a good person's untiring fight to win garment workers' rights to sanitary working conditions, maternity and paid leave, a raise in the minimum wage, and a stop to the beating and sexual harassment of exploited laborers, including children for whom he fought hard for the protection until the last day of his life at the age of 34, dying from cancer due to benzene exposure. So, and I don't mind saying, like, pieces like this are kind of come out of my desire to pay a tribute to my mother, who also died from benzene exposure, and she also worked in a sweatshop. Okay, next. Next, they will look like this, but the text, the most unfortunate case of Lucy Chono Santos, convicted of smuggling heroin into Indonesia, was to fall victim to a phony employment recruiter who fronted for an international drug gang and later threatened to kill Lucy's family if she refused to do as the gang demanded. Follow her story from growing up in a shanty on the edge of Manila, where she supported her parents and siblings by retrieving value from garbage, as she sat on death row awaiting execution by firing squad, passing her days in a squalid and overcrowded prison. To this is offered the particularities of her finality, including the many press stories, legal and diplomatic documents, and the many affecting and heartrending letters to her son, written a short time prior to her demise, all pressed from the originals of her own handwriting. Okay, next. So I would do, I made maybe about 12 of these, or maybe a bit more. And they all, are lives of people imagined, but they're also kind of composites and so on. And I did an earlier series, which I didn't include, of obituaries, and even with the image text works, I have, death, like, what is it, daddy? There's the implication of death, and so on. Okay, next. Printed by particular desire for the benefit of all who are easily touched by the sincerest allurement that could tempt the human heart, a story of love such as thrived within Amrit Jaswinder Rajput, 19, for Hardeep Singh, her dream of leaving Faridok to be with Hardeep and becoming a beautician rather than to wed her mother's cousin, to whom her family owed money. Her entire life's record, including her kidnapping, torture, and death by immolation in an honor killing carried out by her father Bishanpal and brother Ravi, with events and remarks that may not be deemed uninteresting to the public at large. Okay, next. And these are like sign pieces of mini mall signs. Next. And they look like this. And I was kind of interested in, negation represented by the white, because white is the space of no lease. There's no one leasing it, and so that and the more white rectangles you have, the more this community is threatened. Next. And I want to show some demographics here. There's 3 shops here that refer to Vietnamese sandwiches here. a full house here, and then a Vietnamese restaurant here. So I saw this as, I saw these people as a kind of community. It's a community that's very fraught, and it depends on each other's business being successful, and more people filling in the white rectangles for success and longevity to take hold. Okay, next. These are my most recent pandemic works, which I did for the Middelheim Museum in Antwerp. Next. Next. They have no idea how much I work. They have no idea how hard I work. They have no idea what I do. Okay, next. Oh, and I'm giving you a peek into my new works, which haven't even been exhibited yet. It's only the mirror part. You can see they're in a frame, not frame, in a crate, and they're quite large. They're like over 6 feet square, even though it doesn't look that big in the image. And they have a very kind of high def spray paint. So it's very kind of sharp, the image onto the surface of the mirror. And this is called Main Street, USA. Okay, next. This is called America at Night. Next. This is called Fox News Channel. And you can sort of see the parts that are not painted is a mirror, so you would see yourself reflected in it. Okay, next. This is called Little Bighorn. So this is the landscape of Little Bighorn. And the entire 2/3 of it is a mirror. Okay, next. This is Anna May Wong, the great Chinese silent film star. Next. And I'm just coming to an end here to show you that I write a lot. I've written several essays since this book came out, and I've been working on Monument Lab. We did a national audit. We got $4 million from the Mellon Foundation to do an audit in terms of the kind of distribution of monuments and types of monuments throughout much of America, and so it takes up a lot of my time. And next. And I was project manager for the Short Century exhibition, which was a great show. I was stationed in West Africa because I speak French, and I went to various national archives and did a lot of research and for Okwin Vaser, the great late curator, who was the curator of this show. And then I was a co-curator of Sharjah 7, which is the first really modern, I have to say, biennial in the Arab Middle East. And then I also spent 2 years in China working on Shanghai Modern 1919-1945, and wrote a long 10,000 word essay for the catalog. And basically lost my New York gallery at that point because it was my turn to show, but anyways, I couldn't show because I was in the middle of doing this, right? But anyway, so, but I'm glad so these are things I do on this, not on the side, because I see I'm not interested entirely in the world of art, right? At least not as just being an artist in the art world. I'm interested as someone who's curious intellectually about a lot of things to do with art and culture. Okay, next. And as Patty mentioned, I wrote 2 screenplays, and both of them are seeing some traction, although both of them are also in what is often called development hell. Anyone who knows anything about movies would know they're both in, like, it's very encouraging, and then it's very discouraging, and then it's very encouraging, and then it's silence for a long time, and then lo and behold, 2 days ago, or maybe 2 days ago, it came alive again. It's like the hand in those horror movies. It just always comes back up, right? And it's coming back up again. So hopefully we'll see what happens. So thanks very much. That's my work. Well,
Thank you, Ken. That was fascinating. We are so glad that you were able to speak with us, even though it is virtual. I have some questions for you. The first question is from Jessica Stockholder.
right.
Says,
Great. Hi,
hello, and
Jessica.
thanks for talking here.
A good friend from a long time back. I knew both her parents in Vancouver.
Wow. Well, she says, it seems to me that right from the get-go, your work has been both very intimate and addressed to the public and to the various systems that connect us, for better or for worse. I wonder how your thoughts and feelings about the scale, regional and global, of that public have changed over time. And I wonder, well, she also wondered whether your screenplays are going to be produced, but you just said that.
Well, actually, I'll know whether one of them will be produced by around Valentine's Day. So we'll see. Right. Well, I think there's the whole. That's a good question, but I think there's so much more pressure on public space, on public demeanor, on public formation today. Right, there's so much airing of subjectivities in a public way, and it's almost like the opposite is the problem. Like there's no more privacy at all, right? And I think that's also important. So there used to be, maybe at least when I started, more of an equilibrium between privacy and public, and now I'm not sure. It just seems to be kind of weighted heavily. And not only that, the public that you see, or the way we're supposed to comport ourselves publicly, is often predetermined and shaped and inflected by all kinds of prescriptives we see in advertising, in movies, and peer pressure in internet community groups, and so on. So I think that there's been a kind of intensification in terms of both terms, right, of being private and being public, and so it's not so. I guess it's not so predictable anymore. And I think that's really changed quite a lot. I mean, one of the things in terms of my work, that someone actually said this to me only a few days ago, and said, "Oh, you're the first meme artist, MEME." And I went, "Oh, okay." And then two other people said, "Yeah, I've heard that said about you too." And I guess I'm the last guy anyone mentioned that to me, and so on. So, memes are, as you know, very public, right? And yet what I was really interested in was this kind of airing of certain tensions that, the capitalist economy kind of fixes in whole within us, and we're not supposed to air them. And there would be that tension in terms of our will to air, but our reluctance to air because of decorousness and so on. So yeah, it's a good question. I would say that's how it's really altered for me in terms of imagining a public today.
Okay. Bianca Bova asked, you mentioned being interested in systems of representation. Can you please share more about how that interest relates to your concurrent interest in minimalism?
Well, I mean, when I say systems of representation, I'm really kind of cribbing from Michel Foucault's idea of a discursive system. And according to Foucault, a discursive system was anything that was tangible or even contingent to the whether it's material, whether it's theoretical, whether it's abstract, whether it's constituted by hearsay and rumor, whether it could be any form that really formulated around a particular topic, right? And so minimal art itself has its own system of representation, right? It can have its most immediate one, which is about, you could say, 60s avant-garde notions of sculpture. It could be larger, and you could say something about, a larger system of representation as history, as sculpture has been developed as a discourse over time. You could even be larger and kind of include object theory and non-art objects, and how that has played a role in terms of sculptors' thinking. So I wasn't entirely clear in terms of the question, but systems of representation can be as small or as large as we make them to be. right? And I'm always interested in systems of representation because I'm also interested in deconstructing systems of representation. I don't take systems of representation, I don't accept them for what they are. I think it's always healthy to question them and to break them down and to try to understand how is it working? It's like a machine, right? The propaganda machines are often systems of representation. So how do they work? What are the underlying messages? Who is not being heeded? Whose voice is dominant? Whose interest does it serve? These sorts of questions are at the heart of systems of representation.
Tony Tassett asks or states, a lot of Americans in the last year or so only jokingly say they want to move to Canada. In your view, does art play a different role in Canada compared to the US?
Well, Tony Tassett is a great artist. And so it's ironic he should ask that question. That this is my first day being an American. No, I think you stay. I think as an artist, it's you stay in the place where it's the most interesting. To me, I find it way more interesting here than in Canada. It's not that Canada's like, Canada's not bland. I don't want to, kind of reify this image of Canada, right? And there's a lot of problems there, as the discovery of native bones and children's bones in residential schools have borne out. Right, but there's just a lot more at stake here, at least for me, right? And I want to be a part of that. I want to, Monument Lab started as you might say, as a kind of, I love certain questions about the city, and so, and it was a lot of work, and it's successful now. I guess we have like about 25 people in Monument Lab, and we get so much work and so much interest from the Ford Foundation everywhere and so on. But it started in my office in 2012. And I have to say that if it didn't start in my office in America, it probably wouldn't be where it is. So, in America, there's a lot of problems in America. I'm not excusing those problems, but I think there is something like, if you have an idea and you want to, and even if it's an idea that's not really cashable, it's an idea like Monument Lab, it's an idea about social justice and stuff. People gravitate and say, hey, that's a good idea. Let's move forward on this. And I think that's a testament to one of the really true strengths of America.
Good to hear. Some of the figures in your work look posed for highly formal portraits, while others have appearance of candid images. What influences the decision to stage them as one or the other?
Well, all the earlier works, much earlier works, were portraits, right? So it was chronological. I was very interested in studio photography, a kind of system of portraiture. And then as the works, as I found that to be somewhat restrictive, and I started getting a larger camera as well, because I started selling some work. And then I wanted to deal with the city, urban space, and so on. I knew it couldn't just be portraits. And so, like, Vote for Bill Draper, those are earlier works. And then the later works would be, the repeated text or the woodcutter's wife, and so on. So, and those ones I really wanted to, as I mentioned earlier, could convey some sense of middle distance. If you look at Orson Welles films, right, one of the great, what was it? Toland was the cinematographer for Orson Welles, and what he did was he had deep focus, right? But it was also always often full figure and a middle distance, and that's a kind of rule of thumb in terms of minimizing any kind of subjective reading of an image, and so it looks more objective. It looks more slice of life.
We're curious how your teaching influences your practice and how your practice influences your teaching.
Well, I've written, please buy my book. I wrote several essays on teaching art pedagogy and so on. It's a great influence. I mean, I think being a professor is really, it's a lot of work, right? And but it's like you're always around people who are who are thinking about art. I mean, you know, as an artist, it's really, at some point, it's really, I think every artist goes through a struggle, or at least I like to believe, because it's a struggle that recurs for me very often. And it's where I have these moments of profound disillusionment with being an artist, not with art, right? The ideals of art, but with being the realities of being an artist. Moreover, the realities of being an artist trapped within the art system, the art world, which can be fun. I'm not saying there aren't moments of joy, but it's also like business. It's also entertainment. It's also, I don't know. It's just things about it. I often catch myself asking, is this all there is to art, right? And although I found a productive way to get around that, and that's why I curated shows, and that's why I write a lot and so on. That's why I started an art journal, a issue journal. All of that is a lot of work, right? But it was my way of trying to learn as much about art in the broadest sense, while still staying in art during those periods where I felt I couldn't make art, and so on. So just that's a roundabout way of saying that when you teach, and I've taught in many places. I've taught in Martinique in the Caribbean. I taught a couple of years in the L'École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. I've taught in China at the Hangzhou Art Academy, and I taught at the Academy des Bildenden Kunst in Munich. So I've taught in many places, and it's great. One thing, one of the joys of being a professor is that you're around students, and they still maintain that idealism of art, right? And that's what drew me into art in the first place, right? Is that idealism, not the can I get a 15% discount? Can I, and so on. Can you make more of these types of work because you're selling those? That doesn't, that's part of the mechanics of the art world, right? But I love being around students, and I think that's influences my teaching, and they teach me things all the time. They force me to read back the books that I all but forgot. So I'm always rereading books, rereading texts, and reading anew, because they have all kinds of interests and so on that I never had, perhaps.
I have a question or comment here where it says, okay, Lee says, hi, Ken. I was fascinated by the direct, indirect reflection of self the work enforces on the viewers, not just in your mirror pieces where the viewers are forced to face themselves in order to apprehend the work, but also in the meme pieces where the viewers are invited to immerse themselves in a particular moment, psychology. As your former student, I am curious about how much of your own self as a maker is in your work.
Well, before I even answer that question directly, I would say that there's a triangulation going on in those so-called meme pieces. The triangulation is this: the text is actually read by the viewer. The viewer is actually reading the text. So the viewer, in a sense, is embodying the text, right? And then, but of course, the text is not only operating according to the embodiment of the viewer. The text is also a caption or an description of the picture. So it actually is actually a kind of kind of elaboration of the picture. It issues out from the picture, right? And such. And of course, there could be multiple texts, different texts associated with that one picture, just as there could be invariable numbers of pictures affiliated with the text, and so on. So there's many elements are in flux all at once, but there's a kind of triangulation between the ascription to the person who's depicted, and then the viewer who's reading the text, right? Because that text is supposed to be the voice of the depicted person, not of the reader, right? So there's a kind of overlap in terms of the voicing of someone else's ascribed voice, so to speak. And so I'm interested in not just identity, but also identification, right? How do we identify with someone else that's not us, and so on. Now, in terms of whether the works are, biographical, I would say, I don't know how biographical they are at any one moment, but I would say that if you take the total oeuvre of my work, using the French meaning, the body of all my work, it's clearly my biography. I mean, I think I can't help it. It's not a vanity project. It's many things that I'm interested in. Because I think art is also about, being an artist is about theorizing the world through your art. And I like to theorize the world, right? Because I think that's all artists have, is to bring their voice and theorization of the world. And of course, what I bring to the world is my own constitution, my own subject position, relative to the infinite number of other peoples out there, right? And recognizing that my own subject position is also constituted intersecting by other subject positions, including dead ancestors and so on. So all of that is carried within me, and I think it's discernible if you look at the oeuvre of my work.
Okay, so we're running out of time, so we have a last group of questions. It's like 3 questions that are related. Several people are wondering if you can talk more about your relationship to text. And then Aaron Gent specifically wants to know, how did you choose your typeface and color palettes for your early language paintings? And he also asks, did you ever tell your mother about what the curator said regarding the ugly furniture you said to her?
Well, when that curator said that,
That was for her.
my mother had already passed away a long time ago. My mother passed away when I was young. And so, no, I never did, right? But it was just a case in point in terms of that there's all kinds of, the art world likes to believe that it's a kind of meritocracy. It starts, of course you have to have talent. I'm not saying you can be talentless and go somewhere, but it's not like everyone starts in the same place. I mean, I work at an Ivy League university, right? And there's good students there, and who, we can only fund so many students, and some students or applicants are wanting to come in, and, and it's like $57,000, right, for tuition. And that doesn't include $9,000 for fees. That doesn't include living. And there's something wrong with that, right? So, and yet we like to believe that, oh, that's a good school if you go to that school and so on, but we never take into account the kind of differentials in terms of social standing of people. Now, I forgot what the other question was.
Of
Text?
typeface.
Oh, typeface. Well, I mean, I don't believe in, see, one thing I tried to do is, I don't believe in color theory. And I also don't believe that, I'd like to send up taste, right? Because if you go around the world, you realize that, you go to India and you can see, signage everywhere, and it's just loud and different and so on. And then you go to Poland and it's different. And sometimes they're really poor. You go to Mexico and so, generally often very badly painted. No one's really even learned how to sign paint properly, right? Is that a bad thing? I don't think it's bad, right? I think it shows poignancy. I'm interested in those types of things. It shows, I can't afford a sign painter, so I'm going to make the sign myself. I'm interested in those types of elements coming into play for text. I'm not interested in, is this good design or is this bad design, and so on.
I want to thank you so much for speaking to the SCA and the wider community about your practice. It was really fascinating, and especially enjoyed the give and take of the questions. We are really grateful for your time and energy, and are honored to host you virtually, and hope one of these days we can get you in Chicago. I also want to thank the audience for joining us tonight. We look forward to seeing you on February 9th for our next public program with Cameron Rowland. Good night, and thanks.